There are many people that are only engaging in criminal activity because it's the only way they can pay the bill. Because we as a society do not provide people with good wages. We do not provide easy access to a variety of jobs that do provide good wages. We don't provide people the tools to even get to the point where they can have those better jobs, like going into higher education, because we penalize people for the crime of wanting to be more productive members of society in that way as well. And then so many people have to turn to a variety of things that they probably wouldn't want to be doing because of how dangerous they are, because of how it ostracizes them from broader society, from how it alienates them from the people around them. You end up creating monsters in that way, where if we didn't suppress people's individuality, if we didn't try to force people to be the way we think they should be, and allow them the freedom to be the people they want to be, you end up with the problems we have. And that seems to ring true in Signalis as well. So I recently beat the game Signalis, and by recently I mean like November 22nd. I've been meaning to make a video on this for a little bit, and I guess I'm doing it now. So, Signalis is a game. That much we know for certain. It's a really good one, too. It's reminiscent of the old Silent Hill games. It's a top-down, like 2.5D, the correct term, survival horror game with, you know, limited inventory space, limited resources, puzzles, all this kind of stuff. It's really, really cool. It was developed by, what's the name of the developer? I think it's Rose Engine. I'm so smart. It was developed by Rose Engine, which is, I believe, a duo of two different developers, Yuri Stern and Barbara Whitman. They did an exceptional job with this game. I'm not sure if they've worked on other projects. It says their current one is Signalis. That's the one I've played. They are German, that's true. They produced an incredible piece of art. And I want to talk about it not so much in terms of the story itself or the mechanics of the game, but rather as a jumping off point for a broader conversation of a more meta topic, shockingly around identity, trans issues, and the way that our emotions work. There will likely be spoilers for the game in this video. I'm going to have a helpful little thingy up here to let you know when that's happening. Also, I'll say it. We'll have timestamps in the description and in the little playback bar that will have clearly defined spoilers. I'll try not to slip spoilers in accidentally elsewhere. The main point is a meta conversation about a topic that's relevant to the game, but doesn't, like, we're not going to be talking so much about it. But I need to, you know, give people some information for people who may not intend to play the game, you know, as well. If you want to watch along, I want to make it consumable for that audience as well. But if you do have an interest in the game as I described it, it's very gay. It's got women in it. It's got robots. It's a dystopian Soviet punk future vibe. It's a little spooky. The art is fantastic. If any of that is interesting to you, I highly recommend you go and buy Signalis. I believe it's $20 on Steam. If that's too steep for you, I'm sure it'll go on sale at some point. Add it to your wish list, all this kind of shit. But Rose Engine, you know, Yuri and Barbara really made a good piece of art here, and it is worth the money, in my opinion. But, you know, if you don't want to play it, if you don't have the time or you don't have the interest, hopefully this video helps you learn a little bit more about the game. So, I beat this game November 22nd, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I ended up thinking a lot about it, you know, throughout my playthrough. When I took breaks from the playthrough, I was talking to friends about it who had played the game, talking about, like, the world and the story, and even, like, some parts of the mechanical aspects of the game, which I personally did not enjoy as much, but the story was so good and the art was so good that I was willing to, you know, keep going with it, even though the mechanics are not necessarily to my interest. I have apparently what they would call the goopy gamer brain, meaning that I really like very mechanically intensive games like Souls-likes, like speedrunning and stuff like that, like, you know, Rocket League, heavy input-based games with responsive inputs. Signalis is not as much that, and because of that, I was having a little bit of trouble sticking with it on the basis of the mechanics, but the story hooked me and kept me going. And I even, you know, warmed up to the mechanics over time after thinking about it more and experiencing it more. I did play it on the hardest difficulty, by the way, which, you know, is probably not the best idea for your first ever playthrough, but that's just how I play games. And that did make it harder and likely altered my perception of the mechanics of the game as well, considering that ramp up in difficulty required me to use more resources and stuff, which made the game harder and all. Anyway, the story was really good. So after all that, and after having beaten the game, I ended up being really interested in learning more about the game, because I knew there were multiple endings you could get. I knew that there was probably content from the story and the game that I had not experienced. So I wanted to go online and see what was up, you know? I wanted to go online and see what people were talking about when it came to the game. I ended up watching one video that focused a lot on the themes of love that are very present in the game. And then from there, I found this particular video. That video was still good. But I found this particular video from noclip crew. I believe the person who made this particular video, or who narrates it, hosted, filmed, and edited by Jeremy Jane of noclip crew. I ended up finding this video entitled "SIGNALIS Doesn't Want You to Understand." I watched it, and it was incredible. First of all, Jeremy did a great job. The video is very much Jacob Geller vibes. If you like Jacob Geller, you'll probably like this video. I will link it in the description. I'll be referencing it in this video as well, because that's what really kickstarted my brain into this thought process that I'm going to deliver to you. It's really good. I very much appreciate it. Jeremy for putting it together. And I had looked up this information because I wanted to learn more about the story. I wanted to figure out more about what was going on. I wanted to try to logic together, through the winding roads that the game takes you when it comes to its story, and try to put the pieces of the puzzle together in order to better understand the story in the game, because that's how I usually like to enjoy media. I play games as a completionist a lot of the time. I'm a speedrunner. I run 120 star in Super Mario 64, which is every star in the game. I'm a big fan of seeing as much of a game as I possibly can, especially if I really enjoy it. But I did not know if I wanted to do that with SIGNALIS for a variety of reasons. So I was like, okay, well, what else is going on in the game that I have not experienced? So the basic premise of this video, obviously, is SIGNALIS doesn't want you to understand. And I realized that by doing what I'm doing right now and what I was doing then, I'm kind of contradicting the intentions of Rose Engine. I'm kind of contradicting the whole point of the story by trying to put together the story, by trying to understand it better, and by trying to logic out a variety of elements in the story, because it's supposed to be incomprehensible in a Lovecraftian sense, like a cosmic horror sense. There are a lot of references to Lovecraftian works. There's a lot of references to cosmic horror, and the game itself and the story itself is very cosmic horror. So to try to understand it and logic it out in this way, which you're allowed to do, is kind of anathema to the intentions of the story itself, right? And I didn't realize that at first, because my initial thought whenever I engage with any media is, okay, how do I logic this out? How do I put this together in a way that I can understand, that gives me a fuller, broader perspective on the issue, on the media at hand? And that's kind of the opposite of what the game is telling you to do. What the game is constantly, throughout the story, telling you to do, to stop doing that. And I think the game does it really well to try to beat you out of that idea by, every time you think you're finding out more about the story, they end up throwing in another thing that kind of complicates it more and throws off your scent of the trail that you thought you were following about the game. It introduces other complexities that, completely make what you were thinking before incorrect. And a variety of aspects of the game in an actual gameplay story sense, you do that as well as the character Elster you play in the game. And that's really cool to me too. And the broader conversation I want to have about this is about that concept. And at this point, it's not necessarily a spoiler, but if you watch past this point, you will interpret the game in a way that you might not have if it was your first time playing it and you knew nothing about it, like me, going into it. So if you don't want that to change your experience and you want to play the game, you should stop watching this video now, keep it in your watch later, play it, and then come back here. It's not necessarily a spoiler, but it may change the way that your first playthrough, you perceive it in, your mind. And that, for me, would be enough to click off this video, so go ahead. Or, the live stream if you're watching it live. But the essential thing I want to get at, for the reason why I'm making this video, is that the idea of the title of this video being SIGNALIS doesn't want you to understand, and the first chapter here in the video is it wants you to feel. I think that's very profound and true for the game, and it kind of changed the way I think about media generally from this point on. Because I hadn't really thought of media in this way. It doesn't want you to understand, it doesn't want you to logic out a variety of aspects of the story. It wants to make you feel an emotional impact or connection with the story itself, which is different from understanding it in a broad logic sense. There's ways to understand something through emotion and the emotion that it gives you and the emotion you have in response to it. That is a kind of understanding, but when we say understand, we mean logicking it all out. figuring out the whole story, you know? And I was thinking about this and I was like, wow, that's really true, actually, from what I could tell about the story and from what I can tell about how I've engaged with other media in the past. So an example that I can give is when I watched Evangelion and End of Evangelion for the first time ever. That story, especially End of Evangelion, the movie, which is the true final season, the actual final season of Evangelion, the anime, is apparently not what you're supposed to watch. End of Evangelion was the real ending. They just, couldn't make it as part of the anime for whatever reason when it came to the publisher or something like that. So they ended up making a movie of it outside of that publisher so they could actually deliver the story. Anyway, and throughout the story, there's a lot of cosmic horror elements of what's going on. There's a lot of things that are hard to comprehend as a human being in Evangelion. And toward the end of it, especially in End of Evangelion, it's incomprehensible. It's very disorienting. And throughout the story, especially at that point, my tiny logic brain was being like, okay, how do I figure this out? What is going on here? Let me put the pieces of the puzzle together. What is this story about? What are these threads that I can follow to weave together this tapestry of Evangelion, the story? What am I trying to be told here? When that may not be the entire point. At that point, if I can't possibly comprehend what's happening in this story, there aren't very many other things I can do but feel something about it. Have some kind of an emotional response about that piece of media. Because if it's out of my comprehension, the most it can do is give me a feeling. If we can't argue on the basis of facts and logic, well, we're going to have to argue on the basis of feelings, right? Even though apparently one may not care about the other. And that's something I now know in retrospect would probably have given me a different experience of watching Evangelion. And you don't have to engage with it in that way, but you also can. And it may have even been the intention of, the writers of the story. And this is what I understand from SIGNALIS now, and from watching this video from Noclip Crew. And what else this connected to me is okay, well, why is it that I have this instinct, this tendency, this automatic response to try to logic through these things? To find patterns, follow them, and try to put everything together in that box and understand them in that way. Why is it that I immediately do this? And in asking myself that question, I thought, well, how else have I done this? Well, there's other media. I thought of Evangelion in that moment. But there's also my, interpersonal social interactions throughout my life. So what I remember in my life is that if anybody ever came to me and confided in me with whatever issue they were having, if they came to me in sadness, in anger, whatever it was, my immediate response was to try to find a solution to that problem. And that in and of itself is not a bad thing. If you can find that solution to the problem, if you can try to logic out what they're telling you and try to help them in that way, that could be helpful to that person. But that's not always what people want. In fact, if you're a man and a woman comes to you with a problem, often your first response is going to be, okay, well, here is a laundry list of possible solutions that I have logicked out and eventualities that could occur from the information you're giving me. And here's a bunch of different ways we could attack this issue that I might even be able to help with to try to fix this problem for you so that you don't feel this kind of way that prompted you to talk to me about it. That could be a way to approach the issue, and maybe that is what they want. But oftentimes, especially with women or feminine people, stereotypically anyway, obviously there's not any essentialist aspect of this, but women and feminine people are socialized to be more this way, whereas men and masculine people are socialized to be more of the logic problem solver way. That is not an innate aspect of our biology, obviously, but it's just the way that society kind of guides people to being. So in my life, whenever any feminine person who was socialized in that way came to me with that problem, I often felt that my efforts to try to help that person through trying to solve the problem didn't do as much as I wanted. Or I felt like their response to me trying to help with that problem through that kind of problem-solving way ended up not helping them at all. Or they didn't give me a response that I was expecting because I thought I was doing all I could to help. But it turns out sometimes people just want you to listen to what they have to say and then share an emotional response to it with them. Sometimes people just want to feel something emotionally with you. And that is enough to help them in their own internal process work through whatever problem it is that they have. Sometimes that's all they want. Sometimes that's a piece of the puzzle that helps them with that issue that also, the problem solving logical side of things would like fully complete and help. And sometimes people just want the problem solving part of it. That'll usually be the case with like strangers asking you to help them, right? Like, oh wow, it's raining and you have an umbrella. Could I walk underneath it since we're walking the same way for a little bit? Okay, you're coming to me with this information. Problem solving dictates, my logic dictates, yeah, you could, right? Go ahead. There's room under here for two. But when it comes to more interpersonal and intimate relationships that you might have, intimate not in like the romantic or sexual sense, though of course that can be relevant, but intimate, more than just being strangers, I mean. So maybe it's not the best word, but like closer relationships, I guess, that you could have, platonically with friends or romantically with loved ones or, platonically but through familial love with family. You know what I mean? I'm rambling at this point, but that's the vibe that I got. And for me, that was a really profound kind of realization that I typically have had trouble consoling people who have come to me and confided in me about a certain issue, usually, feminine people, just because of that socialization. I've had difficulty throughout my life with that, and now I understand why. And it reminds me of a variety of stories that I hear and that now I've experienced myself as a trans person and from trans people. Because before I understood myself to be trans, before I, biohacked my body to have my dominant hormone be estrogen and all this, I was under the assumption, flawed as it may have been, that I was a cisgender heterosexual guy. A cisgender heterosexual man. And, I allowed society to mold me in the way that is the expectation for that kind of a person. Now, I've always been more androgynous because of my biology. I've been more hairless, I'm shorter, smaller frame, all this kind of stuff. Even before HRT, I've always liked having longer hair and all this kind of stuff. But I was never like super femme. I was never even trying to do it because there was a lot of resistance in my life to the idea of me feeling like I could do that. And because of this, I didn't have this experience on the other side of that fence, right? I have never gone to somebody and tried to confide in them and have the only response to that I want and that would help me, even if I didn't know it, be for them to just share an emotional moment with me and not try to provide a solution. Anytime I've ever gone to someone with any kind of thing like that, I've been looking for solutions. At least that was my thought process. It's entirely possible, if not likely, that I was actually also looking for that emotional moment and that connection. But because men are not socialized to share emotions with other people, to show vulnerability or emotion in that way, it's just not a thing that was in my mind. It's not even a thing that I had conceived of. Like the idea of going to somebody and trying to share an emotional moment in that way with them because I'm sad, angry, whatever, is like, how are you doing that? Like, you're a man. You're not supposed to do that. That's not expected. It feels weird. All right? It's weird, okay? You're being a little sus if you do that, when actually you're not. And that's like one of the negative aspects of how men are perceived in society. Not having emotions, bottling them up, keeping them to yourself until eventually the dam of this, information dump in your mind breaks, and then you have some kind of, a lashing out process where you likely hurt yourself and also other people. It's not good. And if you could, relieve some pressure on that valve just from going to people, confiding to them, explaining your emotions, and just having an emotional moment with them, even if the problem-solving part of it helps as well, that might help you be happier, more content, or even solve these problems later on in your experience. And now that estrogen is the dominant hormone in my body, the way that my mind perceives emotions has changed, in my view, for the better. Now, not for the better in like a biological sense, but rather it gave me more of an insight into what it means to experience these emotions, because now I'm experiencing it from two different viewpoints. From testosterone being the dominant hormone in my body for most of my life, and then from estrogen being it in my more recent life. And in that way, it's better for me because I've had now both of those experiences and I understand more about it. But also, I think it's better for me generally as a person because I like being able to be more emotional like that. Like, I was tearing up talking to someone the other day about something, and I enjoyed that. I liked it. Where in the past, if ever I was able to cry, which was incredibly unlikely, I would always try to stifle it because I didn't want to be, seen as weak or whatever. Because it's weird, apparently, for dudes to cry, even though it shouldn't be. So now that, I have this understanding, I'm realizing that this game, it has the capacity to teach you that same concept that I've been describing this entire time, even without having, had the lived experience from either side of the issue of sometimes you just want to feel and you don't want to understand or logic something out. it could actually do that for people that have not had or have no intention to have that experience. Because obviously there are more cis people than there are trans people in the world. And it reminds me of so many stories of like transmasc people who were socialized as girls for a lot of their life, and the way that they talk to people, the way they confide with people and their issues, and all this kind of stuff before transitioning is drastically different to when they present as a man and are perceived in society as one. And they often talk about how the world seems lonelier, the world seems emptier, that their interactions with other people seem more hollow because of the frame of reference they have of being socialized in a feminine way or as a girl, right? Being able to share those emotions is no longer an option that they have with people that aren't aware of them as a person and are closer to them, or even those that are, if they are perceived as a man, because sharing emotions as a man, you're not supposed to do. Society dictates it's cringe, so you shouldn't do it. And the other side of the coin is what I'm describing there as well. And I just found that to be really interesting. I found that to be really cool. Now, of course, like I say, this is not essentialist to anybody. Feminine, masculine, testosterone having, estrogen having. Like, it is not essential to anybody. It's not intrinsic. It's not innate. But because of societal pressure pushing people to be a certain way, and because of how testosterone and estrogen make you interact with your emotions, make you feel them, and the thought processes it kind of moves you toward, it's a whole complex, map of how these things come together and make a person a person. All of this I'm talking about more in a general sense because I kind of have to, because to do otherwise would require a lot more, in-depth, targeted, case-by-case kind of talk that I don't have the capacity to do right now. And, I feel that is really cool. Man, I don't even know if I have to go into spoilers, actually, outside of, like, that being the big one. And by the big one, I mean, like, the fact that SIGNALIS doesn't want you to understand, it wants you to feel that potentially changing the way that you experience the game. For me, like I say, I would click off the video before when I warned about it earlier, play it, and then go back to this. But I don't think I even need to go into the video at all. You should just watch it. I'll have a link to the Noclip crew and Jeremy Jane's video, SIGNALIS Doesn't Want You to Understand, in the description. And you should absolutely watch it if you've already played SIGNALIS, or if you have no intention to play SIGNALIS. However, if you do think you would want to play this game, you absolutely should. Because it's given me this kind of profound understanding and perspective on something that isn't just, localized to the game itself. I've now applied it to a variety of aspects of my life, media I'm consuming or relationships that I have, in a way that I believe has made me a better, more whole and holistic, person, and has augmented my experience as a human being in a positive way. Also, the game is queer as hell. It's very gay. It's very lesbian, which is really cool. I'm a big fan of that. It's also, like Soviet punk, retro futurist, and there's a lot of interesting commentary on what it means to be human, what it means to be alive, what it means to be an entity worth moral consideration, depending on your morality and whatnot. It tugs at a variety of strings that I find to be really interesting. It's got a lot of, reference to Lovecraftian works and cosmic horror. It is a cosmic horror game. The spookiness of it is, not the scariest game I've ever played, which I'm kind of happy about. I think the way they make it spooky is more of like a tension, but there are some like moments that made me jump. There aren't jump scares though, I don't think, in like the traditional sense. And the art style is wonderful. It's a very pretty game. I'm a big fan of it. The puzzles are fun. It's good. There's another aspect of this video that I wanted to talk about, just as like a brief addendum to it. And so I guess in this way, this will be like a story spoiler segment. So if you don't want to see any kind of spoiler, or hear rather any kind of spoiler, then I think now would be the time to click off or skip, this and go to the timestamp afterward. So at this point in the video, this is the SIGNALIS decrypted segment of it. And, we're at a little bit more than halfway through this particular segment. So far, Jeremy has just been going through the story, giving people like a primer and then going a little bit deeper into the story and trying to explain a lot of what's going on. And what's being talked about immediately before this is one of the secret endings. So like this is a giga spoiler, once again. And it talks about one of the interpretations of the story in that, is it all a dream? And that idea is based off of the fact that, we've got two major characters here, not pictured on screen. One is Elster, a LSTR replica, a robot, who is imprinted with the psyche of, I believe, a living human before then, in order to get them to act like that kind of human so that they're easier to control as, autonomous robots that can do a variety of work. In this case, Elster is a maintenance robot. She's like an engineer. She fixes up this ship that she's on with the human of, pilot of that ship, who is Ariane. And Ariane and Elster end up developing a relationship that moves past just, this is a robot that maintains the ship and I am the captain of the ship. But they actually develop a closer bond, one that we assume to either be romantic or like familial love vibes. I'm pretty sure it's romantic though, because they're not family. But I don't know if it's like a found family thing. I'm pretty sure it's romantic in that they were roommates. And there are things in this game that will, give you clues about that and whatnot. And the entire premise of the game, as your Elster, is to go and find Ariane because you don't know where she is. You're trying to find her throughout the events of Signalis. Eventually, super spoilers by the way, you find out that Ariane is what they call a resonant being or human. Bioresonant being, I believe is the term. So essentially, she's a psychic. She can influence the actions, thoughts, and whatnot of other beings. And because of that, she's very powerful. She's not the only one that can do this, in my understanding, but she's one of them. Essentially, we end up finding Ariane in a cryostasis chamber in the ship that Elster used to be on, that you eventually make your way back to finding. And you end up finding out that you and Ariane made a promise. A promise that if worst came to worst, and they failed their mission, which at the time, this two-person crew was to go out as part of the Penrose project, I believe, for this civilization, to go find a habitable world. They get launched out of an orbital cannon in this spaceship. The chances of finding a habitable world are so low that they end up getting a transmission about the fact that if it becomes exceedingly unlikely that you're not going to find this habitable world, you should not try to prolong your life, because to do that would be to prolong your suffering. You should just end it quickly, or have your replica end it quickly for you, or go into the cryostasis pod and essentially have it euthanize you in that way. So because of this relationship that Elster and Ariane develop, eventually they make a promise, Ariane does with Elster, that if things go wrong, if they don't succeed in that mission, Elster would kill her or let her die. The specifics and morality of that are up to you. Kill her or let her die. Those are the options. And the entire time you're playing this game, you're trying to find Ariane. You don't know why you're trying to find her at first, but eventually you find out it's because Ariane wants you to let her die. You find out that she had actually been in that cryostasis pod because Elster put her in there and kept her alive in an attempt to try to be able to save her later on. But this is thousands of years ago, apparently, in the story. So this super powerful bioresonant being, Ariane, this human, is just in this cryostasis pod. You don't know if she's suffering in there. You don't know if she's conscious. You don't know anything about that. The reason, by the way, why they're dying is not because of any, I don't know if lifespan, I don't think is an issue. But the main issue was that they ran out of resources in the ship, eventually had to crash land somewhere because they had been going at the mission for so long and failed. And the nuclear reactor that powered the spaceship ended up failing. Radiation started leaking. They get radiation sickness. The planet they're on is not habitable, so they can't live off of anything from there. They're essentially stranded there. They're gonna die. The radiation leak ends up obviously giving Ariane cancer, and because she's in that cryostasis pod for so long, it develops into a pretty bad case of it, even though she's still somehow living and kicking in that cryostasis pod, not actually kicking. I know this is probably not a good retelling of the story at all, but whatever, get fucked. That's why you watch me, to hear me ramble. And it's hard to tell the story anyway, because that's kind of the point, that the story is incomprehensible in many ways, and to try to comprehend it is kind of anathema to the intentions of the story itself. Anyway, so throughout the game, you see these what seem like zombified other replicas of other types. There are a variety of other types, like Mina is the name of one of them, and they are hostile to you throughout this facility you end up finding. You have to obviously, fight or evade them. And you're trying to find all these clues, get all these puzzle pieces, put them together to progress the story, learn more about it, and then eventually get to the end point. And there are a variety of endings to the game. So to go back to one of the ideas of it all being a dream, the reason why that's a guess is because eventually one of the threats in the game becomes this like amalgamation of biological material, like literal blobs in the game that end up blocking off certain areas of the game that you used to be able to access or could never access. And those people theorize symbolize the cancerous tumors in the mind of Ariane. And the whole idea of this is that apparently, people are assuming that this bioresonant person, this psychic essentially, Ariane, is trying to contact Elster through this dream, trying to influence her to follow the path of this dream to get all the way back and find Ariane so that she can put Ariane out of her misery. Because she has been in that cryostasis pod for thousands of years. There are several ends to the game, of which we're going to spoil here as well, but you're in the spoiler section, so you know that. The ending I got, and I believe one of the real quote-unquote endings of the game, is you end up finding Ariane, you remember the promise you made with her, and you essentially pull the plug, and then you die next to her. When she's in the cryostasis pod, you end up dying right next to her, because you were on your last legs, and you just got there. There's also a bunch of other L-Star replicas around, littered around the ship and inside the ship that are also dead, and you see them throughout the facility that you end up going through to get to this point. And there's a theory that this is not the first time Ariane has tried this with an L-Star unit, an L-Star replica, and that she keeps finding a way to contact the new ones, because there are several L-Star replicas out there. They are mass-produced and distributed out, right? So she's tried this several times, and if you get this ending, you are the one that finally succeeded. There is another ending where you get to her, but she doesn't remember you. And I forget if you let her die or not, but either way you end up dying. There's one ending that might be that one. I didn't get it. This is just what I've seen from this video, where you end up not being able to kill her. I think because you can't bring yourself to do it, so you just let her stay alive. And you end up walking out into the nothingness of this planet that they were crash landed on and just dying alone. And there's also a secret ending where you need to find 3 keys through deciphering cryptic shit in the game that no person on their first playthrough would ever be able to do to unlock a safe that's in one of the locations toward the end game. That's very obvious. You see it. There's no way you can't when you get to this point because you have to get there no matter what ending you get, where there's this safe with 3 locks on it. And it turns out that if you get these 3 keys through this super cryptic puzzle within the game to get the secret ending, you end up unlocking the safe and you find a lily inside, the plant, a lily. And that plant is also seen toward the beginning of the game, where you see what you now know to be Ariane's childhood home, I believe, where she, lived with her mother isolated on a radio tower or radio station. You find that there's that potted plant lily on the desk. Eventually, it's locked away in that safe. And there's a whole bunch of theming going around that. You should watch this video if you want to learn more about that. I'm not going to try to go through it all right now because I'm already butchering a lot of this. But essentially, that ends up bringing you to finding a artifact that looks like that here. And you end up seeing a scene where Elster and Ariane dance in their absolutely disheveled ship. And who knows how they're able to do that, but apparently Ariane, who should not be able to do this, is able to get out of the cryostasis pod and walk around again, which she should not physically be able to do. Because it's essentially her mind that's the only thing operational when she's in that pod for that long. Her body is done. Even though she still has it, it's not operable. She's just kept alive by this pod, so she shouldn't be able to do that. So there's a variety of interpretations of that. But that is all to say that you needed all that information to know what the hell we're about to have Jeremy deliver to us here in this video. So it's about the artifact ending.
A more literal interpretation of Signalis' story that I enjoy is that the artifact from the secret ending is a literal physical object, some sort of powerful occult relic that exists deep beneath the minds of Sierpinski-23. Dying alone slowly and horribly somewhere out in the universe, Ariane's bioresonance is received by this relic. And once it's uncovered by the mining operation, it acts as a local receiver, allowing Ariane's psychic abilities to leak through into the mining facility. There's something beautifully tragic about this interpretation to me. Signalis is obviously a game that traffics heavily in Lovecraft mythos, and the idea of a Lovecraftian entity not as some cold and indifferent being from a liminal realm, but an incredibly powerful individual human being alienated and bullied and pushed away from an oppressive society. It's this sort of beautiful countercultural idea that if we don't make space for all the different types of people that exist within our society, we run the risk of creating monsters. If we alienate people to the point of hopelessness, if we crush their individuality, we run the risk of curating and amplifying the worst impulses of those individuals.
And that is what I wanted to have you experience from this video, because that is very profound in my view. And it seems to hold true in what I've seen in my life through news stories and all this kind of shit. The quote being, once again, it's this sort of beautiful countercultural idea that if we don't make space for all the different types of people that exist within our society, we run the risk of creating monsters. If we alienate people to the point of hopelessness, if we crush their individuality, we run the risk of curating and amplifying the worst impulses of those individuals. And you can see how that could be relevant to things that you've seen in your life. If we don't allow for people to be who they are, if we try to force people to be a certain way and forcibly suppress a variety of aspects that people might want to show, like being able to, I don't know, show emotion with other people, as a man, be emotional, cry around others, just try to confide in somebody, not to find a solution, not to try to make sense of a whole situation, but just to feel, just to share an emotional moment. If we don't allow for that to happen, it seems unserious, but you end up creating what we understand to be in our current modern day life, and this is not the only way this happens, but in the specific context of men sharing emotions and all this, you end up creating incels, essentially. You end up creating people who are so alienated because they are not allowed to be the individuals that they are and express emotion, express feeling, and get all of that out in a healthy way. You end up creating monsters out of them, or they go on to be really misogynistic, where they go on to be really self-destructive, where they go on to create media and propagandize to other people and bring them into that state of despair, of that self-loathing, and you end up multiplying the problem, kind of like the biological material that ends up swallowing this institution that you're finding all these clues through as Elster. And you end up amplifying those bad impulses that you would otherwise want to be able to handle and deal with and help people with in a more positive and safe way. This is the same for any other marginalized identity out there, any other oppressed minority out there. And that is to say, they don't even have to be a minority. Because what I just talked about, the group of people, so-called incels, that demographic is primarily, majority, cisgender, heterosexual, white men. By no means the minority. If the things that we do in society as a collective of people, the norms that we try to create and for some people force onto others, if those things are based on immutable characteristics, like having dark skin, speaking a different language, identifying as a gender you weren't assigned at birth, your sexuality, if it's things that people cannot change, imagine how much harder it's going to be to live life as that person and provide a positive experience to other people and impact the world in a positive way. Because like Jeremy says, if we don't make space for the different types of people that exist within our society, we run the risk of creating monsters. If we alienate people to the point of hopelessness, if we crush their individuality, we run the risk of curating and amplifying the worst impulses of those individuals, because as a society, we are not allowing them to go for the more positive impulses. We're making it so that they can't. We're pushing them away from being able to do that. So what do they have left? The bad shit. And it becomes, a feedback loop that just ends up making everybody else worse off. Not to mention, the victim of that specific situation. And that rings really true to me, as a trans person, as a, queer person. And even though I don't deal with a whole lot of racism in my life because, I'm seen as white by the majority of people. I'm white or white passing depending on who you ask, because if you ask a racist person, I'm not white because I got a drop of Latino in me. But I could imagine, because of the small amount of racism I have experienced and I've seen, because my dad being a lot darker, being English second language, having a thicker accent, all this kind of shit, and what I've seen him experience, I could see how that could also end up turning people into what we would, consider monsters. People who are doing things that hurt others and themselves often, that if they were given another path, if they were given a better option, if those better options weren't stolen from them and kept away from them behind lock and key, they wouldn't otherwise succumb to those impulses. They would be able to be better members of their community, of our broader, human society. Like, another common example that people will give is when people end up turning to, like, pick fucking Breaking Bad, okay? For something, a lot of people have experience with in media. Not to say Walter White is this way, though his initial impulses are to start making meth in order to pay for his cancer bills, because we as a society in America penalize people for getting sick, for getting cancer, for things they cannot possibly control. We make them pay through the nose as a penalty for getting sick. Because of that, he ended up turning to the manufacture and distribution of narcotics. Eventually, you find out in that story that he's doing it for other motives that are also a part of, the way that men are perceived in society and pushed in society to be. But there are a variety of other characters in the Breaking Bad story that are literally only there because they do not have another option. And this is true in real life as well. There are many people that are only dealing drugs or engaging in criminal activity because it's the only way they can pay the bills. It's the only way they can get enough money to keep food on the table. Because we as a society do not provide people with good wages. We do not provide easy access to a variety of jobs that do provide good wages. We don't provide people the tools to even get to the point where they can have those better jobs, like going into higher education, because we penalize people for the crime of wanting to be more productive members of society in that way as well. So many of these things that we in our society can change, the powers that be that are difficult to, move to act on these issues, and who often directly benefit from keeping these problems the same for everybody else, the 99% of people who have to live under the decisions of those mega wealthy multinational CEO corporation, giga landlords and whatnot. All of us that have to live underneath that are subject to those whims, and it ends up being beneficial for them because, they get an extra zero at the end of their bank account. And then so many people in our society have to turn to a variety of things that they probably wouldn't want to be doing because of how dangerous they are, because of how it ostracizes them from broader society, from how it alienates them from the people around them, drug use for escapism, or dealing it for getting money to live. You end up creating monsters in that way, where if we didn't do any of that, if we didn't suppress people's individuality, if we didn't try to force people to be the way we think they should be, and allow them the freedom, so long as they're not hurting themselves or anybody else, to be the people they want to be, you end up with the problems we have. And that seems to ring true in SIGNALIS as well. And that's such a cool way of delivering the information through the story and through Jeremy's video in this specific part of it. That's one of the parts that really stuck with me. And I'm just going to give you the closing of the video just to tease you a little bit more. You should watch this yourself. We're just going to run through the closing. If I have anything to say, I will. And if not, whatever. But this video is really good. Still spoilers, of course.
An idea that SIGNALIS meditates on several times is that of decay through repetition. The way that by reproducing a thing, we slowly lose touch with the original source. And I think this process of analyzing art to understand it is a form of replication. By constantly revisiting the thing that caused us the initial transcendent experience which impacted us so much that we want to continue to revisit this piece of art, we're essentially trying to recapture that magic. It's a lesson in the impermanence that's inherent to our experience of reality. Everything we experience will decay and slip away, and no depth of analysis, no number of figurines can ever change that. Even in the artifact ending, even though Ariane and Elster are united once more, the ship is still decayed, their bodies are still destroyed from what they've been through. This is not a true recapturing of the moment they once shared on the Penrose 512. Even something as beautiful as this can't last forever, not in the real world. This is ultimately a story about love and connection and the importance of these things, of creating pockets of safety and purpose and human connection, of beauty in a world that tends towards the cruel and indifferent. The artifact ending is, in my eyes, not about the creation of a pocket universe as an illusion, as a masking of reality, but about the creation of all local beauty, connection, and vulnerability as the literal creation of little pocket universes. And that this is how we create meaning in a world that will otherwise serve us endless, senseless violence, struggle, death, sickness, alienation, and toil.
You'll probably notice, by the way, through this, if you're picking up on the themes that are trying to be delivered right now, I am also doing this. By making this video and talking about it, I am also participating in this. And I am once again doing something that is in some ways contradictory to the intentions of the media, that are contradictory to Yuri and Barbara, the developers of Rose Engine, who made this wonderful piece of art. I'm contradicting their intentions as well by making this video. But if I hadn't played the game and then looked at online trying to solve whatever, mystery there was in the game and try to better understand it, I wouldn't have come across this noclip crew video that Jeremy Jane made. I wouldn't have had the more profound understanding of what the game is, or like one of the themes you could take away from the game that I've talked about in the beginning of this video. I wouldn't have this video and this information to share with you, and you might not have received it should it be entertaining or helpful for you. Which is to say that it's not a bad thing inherently to do this with media. It's just that sometimes, and this is up to your own discretion if you know how you're going to approach something, sometimes you don't have to. Sometimes you can just feel what you feel in that moment and then move on. And sometimes that's all you need to do.
Elster and Ariane come together, black and white, two halves of a whole, to create the alchemical mixture. The Philosopher's Stone, the thing that transcends base reality, a pocket universe, a perfect symbol for the value of human connection. If you spend the duration of Signalis waiting for a key that will unlock its mystery into neat little packages of information, you may find glimpses of what you're looking for, but ultimately reaching for these truths is futile. It's overlooking the plain truth for the illusion of some overarching Rosetta Stone to unlock something vast and murky and irregularly shaped. I would propose that this is why Signalis is constantly saying Achtung, attention, wake up. Lost completely in the realm of thought, we disconnect from our own lives. If we're too busy looking for patterns, looking at the gestalt, the macro, we'll miss the micro. We miss the significance of individual events. We don't even experience them, really. But to contradict myself yet again, without the devoted analysis and clue-finding of the Signalis community, I wouldn't even be aware of the artifact ending, the single piece of Signalis' story that I've referenced the most in this video. And I'd be lying to you if I said that I didn't enjoy the occasional lore video, or have Final Fantasy VII figurines on my bookshelf that I think are really fucking cool. And they make me happy. They remind me of a formative moment in my childhood, a moment that made me love games, that deepened my relationship with art. So where does that leave us? Is there an actual Lovecraftian demon god existing beneath the mines on Lang in Sierpinski 23? Or are all these references to the red eye just a red herring, a mislead to draw you deeper into the emotional truth of Signalis? Are these references to Lovecraft and the King in Yellow all a red herring? Are the true Lovecraftian horrors things too terrible to think about? Feelings of alienation, the inevitable decay of everything that you care about. And in many cases, our only recourse is to make something of our lives that feels meaningful, to seek out hidden pockets of beauty and transcendence and happiness and connection. I don't think Signalis is a problem to be solved. Instead, I think it's like some sort of a philosophical time bomb. It's like an occult grimoire. It's a cryptographic packet of emotional information. And the only way to decipher that message, the only way to untangle that mystery, is to look within yourself and ask, what does it mean to you?
Good as hell. So I hope I guess I'll take the spoilers off now. Go back to this. Bada bing. Spoiler over. So I hope you got something out of this. I certainly tried. I know I waffled a little bit in the spoiler section, so if you didn't, watch that, then there you go. You didn't have to see it. Though, Hyperaggressive might edit my waffling into a more cohesive meal, and it won't be as bad. But I found a variety of these things very profound and worthwhile for my life, the way I interpret media, relationships, and all kinds of different stuff. And it is very rare that I ever find a game or a piece of art that does that to me. I think that's rare for anybody. So I highly recommend you play the game. I think that Signalis is a game that a whole lot of people should play because it's good. Once again, Yuri and Barbara knocked it out of the park from Rose Engine, the developers of Signalis. It is on Steam. You can buy it. And you should go watch this noclip crew video that Jeremy Young put together because he did an exceptional job and was one of the pieces of the puzzle that helped me come to these conclusions and allow the game to have even more of an impact on me. Which is, funny considering what we talk about in this video when it comes to trying not to understand things and just feeling them. But that's not a rule, right? You don't always have to do that. There are going to be times where trying to understand a thing is the correct course of action. It's just a matter of, you know, what you hope to achieve, what it means to you. Take care.